thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives. This is Up for a Chat with Cindy O'Mara, Karen Smith, and Kim Morrison.
Here we are, up for a chat about the hottest topics that are important to you, inspiring you to awaken the change within. I'm Karen Smith.
I'm Kim Morrison.
And I'm Cindy O'Mara.
And we have, what do we call him? The barefoot, Bear Grylls. No, that's
Caveman.
you. Caveman.
Hunk of spunk. Gorgeous creature.
Wellness guy.
Yeah, he's just an all-round divine human being. Brett Hill.
Yee-hoo!
Aww, thank you.
We've been dying for this moment, Dr. Brett Hill, to get you on our beautiful Up for a Chat podcast. So welcome to the show, you gorgeous creature.
Thanks for having me on. So much fun.
Tell us where you are right this moment and who you're with.
Well, we're sitting in McDonald's right now. We spent last night in a tent down at Christie's Beach because that's what we do. So I woke up in a tent this morning. Made myself some paleo pancakes, and then went searching for Wi-Fi. And so we managed to find ourselves at McDonald's at Christie's Beach. So we're sitting in the corner of McDonald's for our Up for a Chat podcast. How's that?
I love it. I absolutely love it. But you know what? When I travel and I can't find Wi-Fi, I know that McDonald's will have Wi-Fi. So I go and order a $2 coffee and I sit and use their Wi-Fi. It's brilliant. It really is. I haven't done it for quite a few years because I feel rather guilty that I just buy $2 coffee and then I don't drink it. But I'm with you, Brett. I'm with you. You do what you got to do in order to get Wi-Fi.
I felt a bit dirty because I had to sign up for the account. I had to sign up for an account at McDonald's to get more than 30 minutes of Wi-Fi because I know you girls like to talk. So I thought, 30 minutes is just not going to be enough. So I've actually had to sign up. So I know that I'll be getting all their awesome newsletters now.
And you're going to need to go and have a shower because that smell, that's going to be...
You talking about me on McDonald's, Karen?
You're just pretty. For our beautiful listeners, I know a lot of them listen to you already on the Wellness Guys show. Can you give us a little bit of background as to who you are and how you came to being the Dr. Brett Hill?
Well, that could be a long story. But the short story is, I guess, that I was someone who grew up always wanting to help people. I always wanted to do something in health, even from a really young age. So I've got a drawing at home that my mum kept from when I was in year 3. And I drew a little picture of myself. I was going to be a physiotherapist. That was where I was at, even at year 3. So I always wanted to do something in health and help people. I always loved nature. I always loved the outdoors. And so, growing up, I did Cubs and Scouts and Venturers. I loved camping. I loved fishing. I loved doing all that kind of stuff. And so I love nature. And so when I grew up and started thinking about what I wanted to do as a career, then taking a more natural approach to health just made heaps of sense to me. And so that's what led me towards chiropractic. And so as I started getting chiropractic, I noticed changes in my health that, even though I never thought of myself as a particularly sick kid, I kind of always was sick. I wasn't in hospital, but I was on antibiotics probably about half a dozen times a year. I was always getting coughs and colds and infections. I always had trouble sleeping. I was a really bad sleeper and I was quite asthmatic. And so I started getting chiropractic. And I noticed some great changes. My health improved dramatically, to the point where, all of a sudden I was sleeping wherever and whenever I wanted. I haven't had any form of antibiotic. In fact, aside from something the dentist gave me one time, I haven't had any form of medication since that day. And my sleep improved dramatically to the point where going from spending 2 to 3 hours a night trying to get to sleep, I could sort of sleep wherever and whenever I wanted. So that led me into chiropractic. And then the more I learned about chiropractic, the more I met these amazing chiropractors and went to seminars and learned more about health and well-being, then the more I got inspired to try and want to share those messages with the rest of the world too. I found I was really privileged as a chiropractor to meet these amazing people and to go to seminars and to hear amazing information. But I felt like it just, it was getting shared with the practitioners, but it wasn't really getting out to the public. So that then led me to wanting to spread that information more widely. I started writing columns in a local newspaper in Adelaide. That led me to be doing some radio stuff, which led me to write a book, which led me to start a podcast show. And it kind of all just snowballed from there.
You're pretty gorgeous, I have to say. And I want to ask you, from a personal level, do you feel like the Wellness Guys has been an incredible platform for you to continue the message?
Oh, the Wellness Guys it's the coolest platform. I mean, the thing I love about the Wellness Guys is that we really had no idea what we were doing when we started. I literally, a week before we recorded our first podcast, I literally didn't know what a podcast was. So Lawrence and I had been chatting together on Skype. Lawrence had been chatting with Damien on Skype, and one day Lawrence said, we should record a podcast. And I had no idea what it was. And so he said, well, you download them onto iTunes. I said, well, what's iTunes? So I didn't have iTunes. So I had to go and get iTunes and learn all about this podcasting. And, really, the three of us got together. We recorded that first episode, which we never intended on going to air. We were just going to do a trial run and see how it sounded. And we got to the end of our half hour and thought, that sounded all right. Let's just put it online and see what happens. And from there to be, within 4 months, be the number one health podcast in Australia was phenomenal. And the beauty of the platform, I think, is the people who listen. It's been phenomenal to see the journey of people who have listened into the Wellness Guys, who've then taken action, who've made a difference in their communities, who've gone on to careers in health and wellness, who've started their own podcast. That's been, I think, the biggest strength of the Wellness Guys is the people who listen in. And what they've done with, the message we've been able to spread is that they've just taken it and run with it and made it something bigger than we could have ever possibly imagined.
What's been your greatest learning from the Wellness Couch and the Wellness Guys? What's been your biggest learning?
Oh, that's such a good question. There's so many different things. I learn from Lawrence and Damien every week, let alone all of the guests that we get on. But I think probably the biggest learning from doing the Wellness Guys and the Wellness Couch is that there's no one right way of doing things. That everyone's so different, and there are these amazing people. I remember doing an interview we did with a guy called Rich Roll, who's a vegan marathon runner, and he's amazing, and he's an amazing athlete. He performs amazingly well, and he's so vibrant and so healthy. He's very muscly. And he's doing great, doing a vegan lifestyle. And it just makes you sit up and go, oh, that's all right. Not everyone's the same. Not everyone needs to do the same. There's lots of different ways to skin the cat, and that's totally okay.
Skinning cats? I'm not so sure about that.
Just for you, Karen.
Tell us a little bit about your Paleolithic lifestyle and your barefoot running. Tell us a little bit about how and why that's so important to you.
Yeah, well, I think really that just all stems from my philosophy, which really started as my chiropractic philosophy, and one of the core tenets of our chiropractic philosophy is that your body needs no help, just no interference, and I love that saying, I love that as a philosophy. It's the idea that, our bodies evolved over millions and millions of years to be perfectly suited to the environment we were in. And so we don't need to fix our bodies. We don't need to do anything to make them healthy again. We just need to return them to that natural state, because health is actually a natural state. It's not something that we need to actively go out and create. If we can just remove the interference, if we can just give our bodies what it naturally needs and remove the things that it doesn't naturally need, then our body's natural state is to be healthy. So for me, that led me to start thinking, what is our body's natural state? What is a natural state for a human being? What did we evolve to require? And so that led me to start looking back at, I guess, the anthropological records and say, well, what were humans eating over the period of our evolution? We know that, our genes have changed very little in the last 100,000 years. We also know that our epigenome has changed and our microbiome has changed. So, there's some new information coming out there in that regard. But, genetically, we've changed very little in the last 100,000 years. And so looking at what we'd been eating historically just made a whole lot of sense to me. In the same way, we didn't evolve wearing, Asics Keanu runners. We didn't evolve with built-up structured shoes with arch support and stabilization and forefoot control and, an inch heel at the back of the runner. That's just not what we evolved running in. Our natural state is to run barefoot, is to run without any assistance. And so it made sense to me that, our whole anatomy of our body had evolved in a way that was going to be suited to that, and that would be the ideal way for us to move and to run. So really, everything I do comes from that core philosophy. That flows through literally into the way I raise my kids, the way I shop, the way I exercise, the way I work. Everything I do stems from that core philosophy.
And I know the way, well, I don't know the way you raise your kids, but I have had dinner with you and your children. And, And I remember the dinner, you know, we all sat around the table together, and those children were as engaged with the conversation. And they're only young, your babies, aren't they? How old are they?
Yeah, they're 5 and 7 now, so they were probably 4 and 6, I think, when you came over, Cindy.
Yeah, they were, and they were so engaged in the conversation. And we actually talked about food, and I wanted to try. So Brett had made these gelatin gummy bears, I guess they were, and made different flavored ones as a result of the juice that he used or the fruit that he used. And so the kids were only allowed one.
Oh.
And I'm like going, oh, Brett, I want to try every single one of them. And I was feeling really guilty because the kids were only allowed one, and I wanted to try every single coloured one.
She's just a big kid at heart, actually.
Brett, what is...
You're making me sound like such a hard taskmaster.
I've often looked at you, and you know, you are a picture of health. You know, you're tall, you stand up straight, you've got broad shoulders.
Gorgeous.
You are punk. Yes, you are quite spunky. I've often looked at you and thought, what is a normal day look like for you in terms of food? Because I dare say it's the direct opposite of mine. But I'm curious as to what does it look like for you, and what is your normal, like even for exercise and all that, like what is a normal...
Rituals, what are the things you do on a daily basis?
What can you
Go on, give it to me.
Well, you know, it's such an interesting question because, you know, I look at someone like Lawrence, who I do my podcast show with, and my co-host in the Wellness Guys, he's so ritualistic. He's so structured and so organised. And I often think, yeah, that'd be great to be so structured and organised. I bet he's so productive. I bet he does so much stuff, and he does. And I'm kind of the exact opposite of that. So I'm almost like no 2 days are the same for me. I'm very, I guess, intuitive in how I do things. So for me, you know, I get up in the morning. Probably the one thing that I do, or the two things that I probably do consistently. Number one is I generally sleep in as long as I can get away with. I like my sleep, and so I get up like as late as I possibly can. That's generally my thing. And the second thing I generally always do is I have like a 10-minute shower in the morning. I just like being in the shower in the morning and just chilling out and relaxing and unwinding, and that for me is a great way to start the day. But honestly, my day going on from there is like different every day. You know, sometimes I'll eat breakfast, sometimes I won't. Sometimes I'll go to CrossFit, sometimes I won't exercise at all. You know, sometimes I won't eat my first meal until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, I adjust, 5 days a week. But they're 3-hour, 4-hour adjusting shifts, and sometimes they're in the morning, sometimes they're in the afternoon. You know, between that, I'm, doing a variety of things, whether that's, recording podcasts, whether that's doing interviews, whether that's checking on my emails, doing administrative stuff for the practice, whether that's writing books, so there's, and once again, sometimes I'll do that in the morning if I'm up and feeling good. Other days I'll, have a quiet morning and then work late to the night until midnight. So I'm really not structured at all in that regard in terms of what's a typical day for me. But I guess, if you had to sort of generalize, I'd say, most days I do something active, whether that's doing CrossFit, whether that's going for a hike, whether that's kayaking or snorkeling with the family. Most days I'll do something active. Most days I would say I eat 2 meals rather than 3. So often that is, a late breakfast at like 10 or 11 o'clock, and then dinner. And between that, is, most days involve a shift of adjusting and seeing people in my chiropractic practice, and then, probably a similar sort of period of time working on the sort of more entrepreneurial side of me, whether that's podcasts, writing books, sharing information, creating programs, doing some wellness coaching, those sort of things.
Right. Well, you knew the question was going to come.
She leans in nice and tight.
You and I have been through quite a few personal things together. I want you to tell us, if you're willing to share, the vulnerability and the share, the trauma, the pain, the challenges that you went through in your marriage, as far as the completion of that first relationship. And then I want to walk into that beautiful thing that occurs when someone is committed to working on themselves through something like that, and the amazingness that occurs out the other end of that. So just walk.
All right. We're getting personal now. All right. So I guess starting with the marriage, I was with my ex-partner Beck for 13 years. We were married for 7 years. Have two beautiful children, as you mentioned before. But yeah, that all ended, I guess, quite suddenly for me. It was quite unexpected for me. I spoke about this at the summit. I remember coming home from indoor cricket. I'd been playing indoor cricket with my mates. We'd won a grand final. I was feeling great. And just walking inside and having Beck say to me, Brett, I need to talk to you about something. As that conversation, it was obvious, even from just the way she said it, from her posture, the way she was sitting, that something just wasn't good. Something wasn't right. And she said, it's over. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. And I just remember being in a state of shock. I mean, Kim, you'll probably remember this as well as anyone, because you were one of my closest confidants in that time and were just an amazing support to me. But I just had no idea it was coming, and I couldn't fathom the fact that it had happened, to be honest. It was just in such shock that it had happened that I kind of didn't know where to go next. And for me, I've always very much been based around family. Family's always been such an important part of my life, and such an important goal for me, and such an important part of my whole vision and purpose was creating a life to raise a beautiful family. So when, at the time, I certainly felt like that had been taken away from me. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know where to go next. I lost a lot of my drive to do all of those things that I've been doing. All those things I talk about doing in terms of books and podcasts and all those things had always been about creating a life for my family and about creating a legacy for my family. It had always been about wanting to create a world where that I would be proud to have my kids grow up in, and influencing the world that my kids are going to grow up in. Because my idea of that family was around that nuclear family. Wife, husband, two kids. That was, the white picket fence, the whole works. I had a very a clear vision of what a family looked like to me at that time. So I felt like that had been taken away from me. I really wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be a chiropractor anymore. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do the wellness guys anymore. I really just wasn't sure of anything. And so, yeah, for me, that definitely led into a massive period of introspection, of analyzing what happened and why it happened. And, I delved into that pretty quickly and pretty deeply, which in hindsight, I'm not sure if that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I beat myself up pretty badly about that as I was going through that process of, analyzing what had happened and what had gone wrong and, what my role it was in that. I certainly took full responsibility for my part in what happened, and probably, to be honest, in the early days, took full responsibility for everyone's part in what happened. And yeah, I guess, I realized at some stage that, that wasn't going to change, that I was going to have to move forwards. And so I guess for me, that was really the only option, was to move forwards. I wasn't, I could either sort of sit around and mope about it and feel bad about myself and sort of, I guess, play the victim around that, or I could decide that I wanted to move forwards and try and do better, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I delved into so much stuff. I did a lot of work on some of Byron Katie's work, which was fantastic. The work, which is wonderful. I was reading books, I was listening to audios, I was listening to Up for Chat. That was definitely one of my favorites. You girls were like my pseudo girlfriends for a while there. I would, I was kind of missing that sort of connection and those conversations. And so I realized that, I could listen in to my girlfriends on Up for a Chat and get some of those, some of that philosophy and some of that connection, some of that conversation, which was fabulous. And so, yeah, so I guess gradually I just sort of started working on and working through all of those issues that have been brought up by the breakup of that relationship. Obviously, self-esteem was probably a massive one of those that took a huge battering, just, because of that process. And maybe it was an issue before that happened, I would suggest. And so, yeah, it's been a journey over the last 3 and a bit years, of really just doing a lot of self-work, I guess, really trying to work on finding myself again as much as anything. Yeah.
What would your advice to men out there going through a breakup? Because we could give everybody advice from a female's perspective. But what would be your greatest advice to men going through heartache or transition or challenges right now? What would be your biggest thing that you could impact them with?
I would say the number one thing, without a doubt, would be to be kind to yourself. It's so easy to just beat yourself up. I think one of the things I said at the summit was that, there was a lot of things that were, I guess, pointed out to me in that time, and a lot of things that became clear to me in that time, and a lot of things that were said to me in that time. But by far the worst things that were done to me were done to me by myself. I was beating myself up really badly. I was saying horrible things about myself. And so, I think that's true for most people, is that the worst things that happen are the things that you do to yourself. So I think for men, being kind to yourself is really important. I would also say that being honest with yourself is really important. So really, taking on board the criticism that comes, taking on board the feedback that comes, and being really honest about it. And there's two sides to that. One side is that you need to be able to sort of man up and accept your responsibility in what happened, and accept that you're not perfect and that's okay. And so you have to really take responsibility for the things that you've done wrong, and set about working on that and finding out why you did that and how you can do that better. But at the same time, the other half of the honesty is also understanding that there's two sides. There's two people in a relationship, and so you can't take 100% responsibility. You only ever have 50% responsibility for that relationship and for what happened. So understanding, spending some time figuring out what's your responsibility and what was someone else's responsibility, so that you're not just totally beating yourself up and blaming yourself for everything either. So I think being kind to yourself and being honest with yourself are probably the two most important things.
And then when
Brett, you should see her face. You should see her face. It's just pure mischief.
then what happens when the heart expands and the heart is open and willing to be again? What walks into one's life?
Well, it's true. I mean, I think as much as anything, it's when you do that work, and you do, I guess, work on loving yourself. Really, is what it is working on being kind to yourself and then loving yourself. It enables you to raise your self-worth, and so certainly my experience has been that when my self-worth has become high, when I feel like when it's gotten back to perhaps where it was beforehand, or perhaps even higher than it was beforehand because of the work I've done, is that it was literally almost the moment that happened, the moment I almost feel like I made that decision that I was worth it, was that someone walked into my life, and just, the most perfect person who I'd actually known for 4 years, and had met, had spoken to, had great conversations with previously, had never thought that it could possibly be anything more than that. The amazing girl walked into my life, and it was just perfect. The perfect person at the perfect time for me. But I definitely think it was, and someone who had been through a lot herself, and so had done a lot of the same sort of work. It was very much the case that we'd both done similar sort of work, and that was what we bonded over at first, even before we were romantically involved, was bonding over some of that self-work that we've done, and some of that growth that we've been through, and some of that, I guess, self-love that we've developed. And so I think when you do get yourself into that state of self-love and self-worth, that's when you're then in a position to have a fantastic relationship. And I'm very lucky to have found one of those.
Are you romantic, Brett?
Am I romantic?
Yes. Can a Paleolithic caveman and bare feet be romantic? We're interested.
Yeah, I'm a pretty soppy romantic, actually. Like I think people think of me as a tough guy and a paleo guy and a CrossFitter and a barefooter, and think that I'm a rugged bloke who just kind of grunts and doesn't communicate. But I'm definitely not that. Like I've always been a very sensitive person, a very emotional person. I think a romantic person. Steph's agreeing next to me, so apparently I get a tick there. And so, and the funny thing is that probably one of the biggest things that came out of me, the self-love and the self-worth stuff that I'd been doing, was me acknowledging that I'm a really sensitive guy and I'm an emotional guy, and that's okay. I think for guys, we're told from a really young age that that's not okay. We're told that we have to man up and we have to be tough and that we have to get over it and that we have to stop crying and we have to, stop being so soft. There's a whole bunch of other words I could throw in there that are probably not appropriate for a chat show. But we're told that. And I think one of the biggest realizations for me was that it's okay to be a sensitive guy, that it's okay to be an emotional guy. I kind of look back at my life and realize that that's always been me, and that's kind of always been me when I've been at my best. I was saying to someone just the other day, growing up, I was always that kind of friend-zoned guy who the girls would all come to when they needed to chat with someone, because I was like the good friend who could communicate and who could talk to people. And so I think part of what I've been through recently is realizing that that's actually one of my real strengths, and then that's something that's it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And that I should play to that strength more rather than trying to hide it. I should just be myself and be that, more sensitive, more emotional, sometimes romantic guy. And that's totally okay.
And what do you love about, we could say Steph, because we all adore her as well, and we think she's pretty extraordinary, and the way you two have connected, we were just talking before the show, is like, oh my gosh, magic. What is it about Steph, or as a woman, what is it in women that you respect the most, that you love, that you look to from a male's perspective? What is it that you want in a woman?
Well, yeah, there's lots of things. This is probably the first answer. I think the first thing that certainly drew me towards Steph was definitely her smile. She just has an amazing smile that just lights up a room, and that positive energy, that love that emanates from that is just it's quite incredible. It's amazing. But I think definitely for us, we first connected over just some really long conversations well before we were romantically involved, and it was a mind thing. It was a positive mindset. It was a someone who was wanting to learn and to grow and to evolve and to work on themselves and to become a better version of themselves and to take that passion and want to use it to change the world. I think those are the things that just lit me up and got me very excited and very passionate and feeling very inspired. Yeah.
See, Brett, a lot of women don't have a lot of self-respect. A lot of women don't think that they're good enough. A lot of women don't think that they have these self-sabotaging beliefs that they're not the right thing, they're not good enough, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they say that they're fat or that they're not, this, that, and the other. I'd love you to say, from a male's perspective, how much that grates you or upsets you, or is it something that, frustrates you as a man looking at women that do that? What does it feel like?
Yeah. That's a really challenging thing as a man. As a man, what we want to do is make our partner smile. Really, one of the biggest drives a man has is to make their partner happy, is to make their partner smile, is to make their partner feel loved and make their partner feel worthy. That's really, I think, to work caveman. That's a primal instinct, I think. And so that's all we want to do as guys, and I guess, we see our partners differently to the way our partners see themselves. And that can be frustrating sometimes. So, all we want is for our partners to see the amazing person that we see when we look at them. And so I do think sometimes when that's rejected, when that's pushed away, because that's how it feels as a guy. It feels like we're being rejected and we're being told that we're wrong. And guys don't deal with that very well. We're not very good at being told that we're wrong. And so, I think, it's a beautiful thing, and it's a really attractive thing for a woman to be able to take a compliment and just own it. And I know that's not an easy thing to do for many guys and girls, is to take a compliment and just own it. But I do think it's something that we can practice doing and get better at doing the more we do it. And the more we take it and own it, I think the more it does boost our self-esteem and allow us to see in ourselves what others see in us. Because I think that's probably the most important thing for those women to realize, is that the way they see themselves isn't the truth. It's just their perspective, and there are lots of different perspectives around that. And so, their perspective around themselves is no more accurate than everyone else's perspectives around themselves. And so when people are telling you how amazing you are and how beautiful you are and how big a heart you have and how, how generous you are, or whatever the compliments are, those are genuine compliments. That's someone's genuine perspective about you. So take it on board. Be grateful for it.
Okay, thank you. A lot of people go, oh, no, I'm not like that. Just say thank you,
Yeah, absolutely.
And, Brett, I see a lot of, because I swim with a group of young people, and I watch these young people going through relationships, and one in particular I'm thinking about, and she's vivacious, she's intelligent, she's got it all going for her. Great figure, just everything going for her. And yet she sees herself as the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And I just try and say to her, that's not you, not what I see. This is my perspective of what I'm watching at. And that, I think, is why she's not keeping with these relationships very long. So, I'm going to make sure that she listens to this, because I think this would be really good for her to listen to, because I think often we don't listen to a man who has such clarity around relationships and things like that. So,
and I think for her, then the sort of things that I worked on would be really useful. So, I consciously worked on my self-love. I realized that my self-love and my self-worth wasn't where it should be. And so I set about doing things to build that. And it is like a muscle. It's something you can consciously work on. And so, I did things like I started a gratitude journal. And each day in my gratitude journal, instead of just writing 3 things I was grateful for, which is what I've been doing previously, I started writing 3 things I was grateful for. I started writing 3 things that were my wins for the day. So 3 things I'd successfully done that day and succeeded at. And then I started writing 3 things that I loved about myself that day. And that's a challenging one at first. That will feel uncomfortable for lots of people, is to sit down and write 3 things that you love about yourself. Because in many ways, we're taught not to. We're taught that that's egotistical, that that's narcissistic, that that's whatever labels people want to throw at that. But it's a really powerful thing to do, and to sit down and spend a little bit of time consciously thinking about what you love about yourself is a really powerful thing to do. And then I think the other thing that I really consciously started to do was just to sit back and ask myself what I wanted. Because, as a parent with 2 kids, running a practice, doing, several different jobs at once, it's really easy to get caught up in what you're doing for everyone else. I think at one stage I was doing all of that. I was president of the Chiropractic Association in South Australia. I was president of my cricket club. I was, on a working party setting up a new chiropractic college. I was doing so much for so many people, and not doing anything for myself. And I think that's a really big part of the self-worth and the self-love as well, is taking some time to do stuff for yourself. So, one of the things I did was I went and bought a motorbike, which is, total midlife crisis, with late 30s, going and buying a motorbike. But I'd always wanted one. I'd wanted one for ages. And it was just something that I wanted and I wanted to do. And I just decided one day, well, if I'm going to be loving myself, if I've got enough self-worth, then I'm worth it. I'm just going to go and buy myself that toy that I've wanted for ages. And you know what? I felt so good about it. Like, I just felt great. And the first day I went for a ride on my motorbike, and the sun was out, the wind was blowing, and it was just such a time of such joy. I felt so good about the fact that I'd given that to myself, and that I had absolutely no guilt about that. I didn't care that people were judging me thinking I had a midlife crisis. I just didn't care because it was what I wanted to do for myself. And I think, doing things like that, whether it's buying a motorbike, whether it's taking 10 minutes for yourself in the morning to meditate or write in your gratitude journal, whether it's just going into nature, whatever it is that you love to do, is saying to yourself, you know what, I'm worth that, and I'm going to take the time and I'm going to prioritize that in my diary and I'm going to prioritize that in my schedule because I'm worth it. And, the more you do that, the more it builds that self-love and that self-esteem. And that's what will get you into the position where you feel worthy. And then, as Cindy's saying, you can make different decisions about relationships, about career or about, all aspects of your life from that position of self-love, because I think that really is what needs to come first.
Brett, the key, I think, is to be able to maintain all of those gifts back to yourself, even when you are in a relationship as well. So that then being in a relationship, you don't relinquish all of those things in order to be with another person.
Yeah.
You place yourself first in every relationship so that then you've got more to give. And I'm curious to hear about how your kids have responded to this huge shift and change in you, as no doubt they would have seen a difference in you with the way that you are with yourself, but also, as things move on with new relationships, all those sorts of things, how have they seen a difference in you, and how have you managed that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do feel like, in some ways I feel guilty, that over the last 3 years, that I haven't been, I guess, the best version of myself. I know that I'm a good dad, and I know that I've been a good dad. But also, when I look back over the last 3 years, I know I could have been better as well. And certainly, in terms of, I guess, my levels of stress during that time, my levels of presence during that time, my levels of self-love during that time, and what I was role modeling for my kids. I look back at that at times and think, wow, that I could have done better. And I think that's perfectly normal and that's perfectly natural. The key, I guess, is that I'm not beating myself up about that now. I look at that and I think, you know what, I'm not perfect, and that's okay. And I'm taking steps now to be better and to do better. Because I think a big part of that for me, and a big part of that drive to change for me, really was looking at what I was role modeling to my kids and what that was going to be teaching them about relationships, about life, about work-life balance, about their careers, about all aspects. What I was teaching them and what I was role modeling for them. And so, I think for them, certainly, as I've done that and as I've grown and had more self-worth, and I think that's definitely been a great experience for my kids. I definitely think that they've seen that, and I think that's allowed them to feel more at ease with being themselves, which is a beautiful thing. And so I think they I mean, kids just pick up on energy so much. They pick up on your vibes, they pick up on your moods, they pick up on your emotions so much more than we ever possibly realize, I think. And so, I think those changes that have occurred in me have then filter onto probably everyone else in my life, really, in a positive way, which is the beautiful thing, I think, as Karen was saying, is realizing that in some ways being selfish is kind of the most selfless thing you can do. That when you do actually focus on loving yourself first, and putting yourself and your own happiness as a priority, then that's when you're actually able to really truly be there for other people and to give them the absolute best. And as particularly with kids, to role model to them, what that means to put yourself first and, to have self-love and to have self-worth. I think that's probably, for me, the biggest gift that I've gotten out of this whole process is to feel like I'm role modeling that for my kids. Makes me immensely proud.
That's beautiful. And really the key to that is recognizing that you actually matter. And, it always amazes me what we've got to go through as humans in terms of a pain and suffering and separation and divorce or bankruptcy or, whatever it is. We tend to have to go through these dramatic experiences just for us to get that wake-up call to say, actually, you first. And when you put you first, then everything else falls into place. But it's a tragedy that we've got to go through so much contrast before we can get that understanding and get that learning. Do you think you would have got to this place if you hadn't gone through the separation?
Such a good question. It's a question that's come up so much lately. And I think ultimately, the answer is yes. Because I think that for me, I'm a questioner. My primary question is always why. I question everything. I look into everything. I research everything. I overthink everything. And so I think probably ultimately, yes. But I think that it probably would have taken a lot longer. I think that going through everything I've been through over the last 3 years, whether that was, the separation, whether that was, all the child custody stuff, whether that was, issues I've had with the chiropractic registration board and the censorship that's going on at the moment for alternative health practitioners, All of those issues, I think, have absolutely accelerated that process for me. They've forced me to really delve in and ask lots of questions of myself and do lots more research and try and discover myself really as much as anything, but also, to learn about human psychology and to learn about, all the different emotions and all those things. So I think I probably would have gotten there eventually. I don't know if that's just, me thinking highly of myself, but I think I would have. And but I think it probably would have taken longer without those stresses and challenges. And so, I'm certainly able to look at all of those stresses and challenges now and be grateful for them, and to see the role they played in me being where I am right now, and to think, I'm really grateful that happened, because it's totally worth it.
Brett, I want to ask you a professional question. From a chiropractic point of view, why is chiropractic so challenged in mainstream medicine, and what is the chiropractic profession doing about it?
Well, good question. I think the reason that we're so challenged is philosophy. So I think that the problem is that, well, the beauty is that chiropractic has a totally different philosophy to mainstream medicine. So mainstream medicine has a very mechanistic model, and it's based around getting sick people well. And so, we have a healthcare system that essentially, we spend something like 2.7% of our healthcare budget on prevention, and even that 2.7%, most of that is actually spent on early detection that we call prevention. It's not actually spent on prevention at all. So, we don't really have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system. And from the point of view of a sick care system, chiropractic doesn't make a lot of sense. If you were to see kids in your practice from birth, and you see them right throughout their lifetime, and throughout that entire time, they're totally asymptomatic and they don't have any symptoms, they don't have any labeled conditions, they don't have any, whatever. From a chiropractic perspective, that's a massive success story. That's saying, isn't this wonderful? This person has been able to perform at their best. They've been able to thrive throughout their lifetime. And that's a beautiful thing. That's our goal and that's our aim. But when you look at that from a medical perspective, and your aim is to get sick people well, then it doesn't make sense. You say, well, why would this person be going to see the chiropractor? They're not sick. They don't need chiropractic. That seems fraudulent. That seems like you're taking advantage of them. You're just taking their time and money for no good reason, because they're not sick anyway. And so I think it's a philosophical difference. And the problem is that part of the problem is that chiropractors haven't been expressing their philosophy as strongly as they should be. I think chiropractors have, in a large way, bowed to the pressure from the medical profession, from the political powers that be at the moment. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone. I've gone through 3 years worth of arguing backwards and forwards with APRA and the chiropractic board about, stuff that I'd said in my books and stuff that I'd said on my website and stuff that I'd said, on social media. And, at the end of the day, I got to the point where I was being threatened by the Australian government with criminal prosecution for being what they said was in breach of the chiropractic advertising guidelines, because they said that I was saying things that was outside of my scope of practice, and they said that I was saying things that wasn't backed up by a significant enough proportion of evidence, bearing in mind that the research says that medicine is about 18% of that is backed up by the highest level of evidence. So, chiropractors certainly aren't alone in doing practices where the evidence hasn't yet caught up with where we'd like it to be. Once again, medicine's about 18%, they say chiropractic was about 15%. So we, as chiropractors, because our philosophy is different, we get held to an entirely different standard of evidence, entirely different requirements of proof, because we're seen as being different and outside of the mainstream. So I don't think chiropractors are doing enough. I think chiropractors, as a general rule, are quite apathetic about all of this. There's a lot of NIMBYism that goes on, that it's like, so long as it's not affecting me and my practice, then I'm just going to keep going and I'll just keep my head down and hope it all blows over and goes away, or, hope that someone else takes it on and fights that fight. And I think there's a lot of that going on in alternative health everywhere at the moment. It's not just chiropractors. There's so many naturopaths, homeopaths, integrative doctors who are getting immense amounts of pressure to stop doing what they're doing and saying what they're saying at the moment by our government. And I think there's far too much apathy with the practitioners. They need to band together and fight this because it's not okay. But I think also there's far too much apathy from the general public. The studies show that about 80% of the Australian population seek some sort of alternative therapies. Now, I think if those people really knew what was at risk right now, if they really knew that they could be limited access to chiropractors and naturopaths and homeopaths and all those sort of things, if they knew that they were missing out on the wealth of information that those practitioners have got to share, then I think they'd be more up in arms than they are. And so I think it's the responsibility of everyone who's listening to this podcast to start getting in touch with your local member of parliament and saying, hey, what's this I hear about, these practitioners getting censored? What's going on with AHPRA at the moment? And what are you going to do about it? Because I want to be able to see an alternative health practitioner, and I want to be able to get advice that's different to the mainstream. Because quite frankly, I think that not allowing advice that's different to the mainstream is unscientific. People, they bang on about this evidence-based medicine and needing more science, but the first phase of the scientific theory is scientific hypothesis. If people aren't allowed to have a different hypothesis, if we're not suggesting alternative ways of doing things, if we're not questioning the status quo, then that's going to hinder scientific development. It's not going to advance it. Science isn't advanced by everyone just agreeing with what the current status quo is. We need to be able to question that so that we can come up with new answers. We need to be able to challenge the currently accepted theories if we ever want to grow and advance as a society. So I think it's really important for practitioners and for the general public to start speaking up in defence of natural health and in defence of alternative therapies and in defence of the ability of those people who are, probably best qualified to speak about this. You look at chiropractors, 5 or 6 years worth of uni education. I've done a 3-year health science degree. I've done a 3-year Masters of Chiropractic degree. I've learned about the scientific method. I know how to read research papers. I know how to interpret them. I think I should be the person who is allowed to speak on it. Whereas at the moment, what happens is practitioners are not allowed to speak on many of these issues under threat of having your license removed. Yet someone in the general public who isn't a qualified practitioner, doesn't have those same restrictions, can say whatever they like, which I encourage them to do because I think that's great. Now that us practitioners can't do it, I really encourage them to do that. But I do think, it's a really dangerous and slippery slope we're on right now. And it's really at a tipping point right now where people need to start standing up for their rights and start standing up for their, for freedom of expression and freedom of information when it comes to natural and alternative health.
It's actually a ridiculous model that we now see, that people with degrees like yourself and Dr. Gary Fedke, who's a medical doctor, a surgeon, who's been gagged by AHPRA. You've been gagged by AHPRA. And yet you have these people that don't have the science and the degrees behind their names, talking about it. And a lot of it's just common sense when it comes to food, I think. Yeah. We don't need, it's nice to have science to back us up, but in the end, we survived not because of science, we survived because of culture and tradition. And that culture is being taken away from us. And basically, we're in this crazy model where I'm absolutely blown away by it. Like 1 week, Gary's gagged from Dr. Gary Fedke, gagged from talking any nutrition to his patients, to the public, in forum, anything. And I think a couple of days later, some gynecologist, and I think he was a gynecologist, speaks up and tells our beautiful chef, Pete Evans, that he should stick to cooking and have nothing to do with saying anything about health. And I just went, who's calling the kettle black? Do you know anything about nutrition? Have you done any nutritional, study? Whereas I know that Gary has done that study. So I get as frustrated as you, Brett. I just find this whole thing crazy. But the other thing is that you're asking the general public to, ring or write to their local member of parliament. The thing is that we've all got flags to fly. And what flag are we going to, work on at the moment? And I know for me, my flag is something different. It's about making our food safe. So do I fly that flag as well as do that, as well as do that? And I think the profession has thousands of people in it. I don't see why they can't, as a profession, get letters out, and all that members have to do in their clinic is to sign it if they agree with it, and then you send it off. I just think people are so busy now. That's what I'm finding. If I want anything done, I have to do everything except for the signature.
Yeah, I think that's right. But unfortunately, there's so much. The profession and particularly the political bodies that run the profession are under more pressure than anyone else. They're under so much pressure from the government, from these, so-called friends of science in medicine, these lobby groups who are wanting to protect their patch. They're putting immense amounts of pressure. So, unfortunately, many of these associations at the moment are running scared. They don't want to stand up and say what they believe in because they're worried that that's going to have, create a whole bunch of negative publicity for them. They're worried that's going to affect, licensing issues. They're worried that's going to affect private health insurance issues. And so they're not speaking up and they're not running these campaigns. I think they're going about it the wrong way personally, and I've said this to them. In that I think they're trying to run a political campaign. They're trying to deal with this at a political level of, lobbying politicians and speaking about it in the back rooms and trying to help them understand and trying to, take a softly approach of, not ruffling any feathers, trying to stay on everyone's good side, trying to stay in the good books. But, at the end of the day, people who are ingrained in that medical profession are only going to be happy if you're fitting into their box. If what you're doing makes sense to their philosophy. I think what we're doing is totally the wrong way about it. I think we should be standing up very firmly and very publicly stating who we are and what we do and why we do it, stating that we are different and we're totally okay with that, because that's what will get the public on board. And I think when the public are on board, that's what's going to make the political change. I don't think you make the political change in the back rooms and the boardrooms, which is what I think everyone's currently trying to do. And because they're trying to do that, they're scared to stand up and publicly run a campaign like that, because they don't want to get all the politicians, they don't want to get all of the bureaucrats offside. And I think they're going about it in completely the wrong way. But what I'll say as well is, I've spoken to members of the Nick Xenophon Party, and they are currently running a review, or they were running, just leading up to the election, they were running a review into AHPRA. And the review is predominantly looking at other issues of medical bullying and a variety of other issues in healthcare and in the running of AHPRA, which there are a lot of issues with it. But I've been talking to them about including in that review what's going on with alternative health practitioners at the moment, and they've certainly said they'll consider adding that in. And so once again, what I would say to people is, if this is something you're passionate about, get in contact with your local member of parliament, get in contact with the Nick Xenophon team. They're very approachable. They will listen to you if you contact them and if you send them a letter, and it'll, every time that happens, it'll give more weight to it. And it doesn't need to be anything complicated. It can be just a simple message saying, I'm concerned about this issue. I've sat down with them and had a meeting and expressed the issue. They understand what the issue is. So you don't really need to write them a long letter explaining the issue. You just need to let them know that it matters to you. And I think that will help them see that this is an important issue that people care about. Hopefully they'll see that it's an issue that might affect votes, because I think that's what it comes down to ultimately, is the more people contact them, the more they realise that it might affect votes. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to inspire them to take action, I think.
Hey, is he on Facebook, Nick?
I don't actually know.
There he is. Nick Xenophon, politician. So people can go to Nick Xenophon, remembering his name is Nickxen. If you're listening to this, and while you're listening to it, post on his Facebook page and tell him what you think. That's really easy, isn't it?
Perfect. That'd be great.
There we go. We got it.
Hey, Brett, can I ask, I don't know if you're allowed to say it, but you told me at the Wellness Summit what you actually said and what you got into trouble for. Can you share with us what those words were?
Well, there's a whole bunch of words that I'm not. I mean, I honestly, I got reported. I probably had about 30 or 40 different complaints against me for various articles I'd written. I'd written the stuff about medical interventions. I'd written stuff about birthing interventions, about home birthing, about vaccinations. I'd written on a whole range of issues, and I won't get into any of those. But one of the things that I read, and the one that I've consistently repeated, because honestly, I can't see that I could ever possibly get in trouble with it, even though they tell me that I can. One of the things I said was that I choose to eat well, think well, move well, and get regular chiropractic care in order to stay healthy. They told me that sentence was in breach of the advertising guidelines, and that sentence would potentially lead me to a criminal prosecution for being in breach of the chiropractic advertising guidelines. Now, if that's not insane, I don't know what is. I mean, that is the most simple statement about what I choose to do. It's not advice to anyone else. It's not any sort of recommendation. It's a simple statement about what I choose to do. And that apparently is in breach of the advertising guidelines, because what they said that statement implied that you needed regular chiropractic care in order to stay healthy, which is actually not what I said. But that's what they took from what I said, and because they took that from what I said, and that they think that that's not right, that they then said, well, that's encouraging indiscriminate use of a health service, And that's what they were saying was in breach of the guidelines. Now, I mean, that's just insane. I mean, who could possibly listen to that sentence and think that should lead to a criminal prosecution in Australia?
Say it again. Say the sentence again.
It was, I choose to eat well, think well, move well, and get regular chiropractic care in order to stay healthy.
So can I just ask you, who's the they? APRA. It was
Well, it's essentially APRA. Yeah, it's essentially APRA. I mean, ultimately it's the Chiropractic Board of Australia who decide whether that's a breach or not. So it's chiropractors. Certainly different chiropractors to me, but chiropractors who ultimately decide that. But obviously they bear a lot of pressure from APRA about that. And APRA bear a lot of pressure from politicians, and politicians bear a lot of pressure from lobby groups like Friends of Science in Medicine, and I dare say other lobby groups related to other industries who may well profit from people not being so well. And so there's a lot of pressure that comes down the chain, I think.
It's funny that you say that, Brett, because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, where does the money come in? Where does the money come in? Because this got nothing to do with anybody actually saying chiropractic is good or not good, whether medical attention is good or not good. Some fat cat somewhere is milking this for all that it's worth, and they are the ones that are holding the key to whether anything, to the expansion of
absolutely
or not.
Absolutely, because if you consider the fact that someone has sat down in order to make these reports against me, someone has sat down and read all 320 articles that I at the time had on my website. Someone has sat down and looked at my Facebook page and scrolled through every single thing I've posted on Facebook. And I'm quite prolific on Facebook. They've posted through every single thing I've posted on Facebook dating back to 2010 to find complaints against me.
Yeah.
Okay? And they've not just done this for me. They've done this for hundreds and thousands of other chiropractors and alternative health practitioners. If you just sit down and think about the amount of man hours that would be required to do that, and think, who's paying this person? How is this person making a living? How does this person have that many free hours to be sitting down in front of a computer doing this?
Somebody's
making money. It raises some questions, doesn't it?
Somebody's making money somewhere. And, this podcast, even though we've reached the end of it now, this podcast has been a real eye-opener in a lot of different areas, I think. If we just look at what you've spoken about today, Brett, in giving men some permission to be sensitive and to do their own personal journey, I think it's been profound. And then, of course, looking at how you've modelled for your kids, and then how your representation of who you are as a chiropractor is continuing to model for the community. I think that you're an outstanding fellow, and I think that there is so much that our listeners can glean from the hour that we've spent with you, and no doubt there's just still so much more that we could talk about and so many more questions. It's just, it's a never-ending journey of exploration, isn't it?
And we adore you, and we love being part of the whole journey with you. And we're very excited to have the exceptional, beautiful Steph as a part of our world. Unbelievable. Is the most divine human being. We adore her as well. So thank you.
Me too, Kimmy.
We figured that one, Brett.
And I
know.
That really
subtle, hasn't it?
Amazing thing about her was her smile.
Yeah.
Then Cindy sent us a little note saying, a satisfied smile.
Not sure where to go with that one.
Thank you for sitting an hour in a restaurant that we wouldn't call a restaurant. So thank you for doing that for a chat.
My absolute pleasure.
So for all of our listeners, hopefully
where can they get hold of Brett?
Oh, where can they get hold of you, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best spot to get hold of me is on my website, which is drbretthill.com. You can find out all the information there about my ebooks. I've got a couple of exciting e-courses coming up really soon. My wellness coaching. So you can find out all that information by going to drbretthill.com. And obviously the podcast, that Paleo Show and the Wellness Guys, they can find on the Wellness Couch, along with Up for a Chat and all the other, I think, 22 amazing podcasts we've got now. So they can find out heaps more information there as well.
Fantastic. Awesome. So all of our listeners, hopefully you've absolutely loved getting up close and personal with our beautiful Brett Hill, our gorgeous caveman, Spunky Bum. He does have a great butt.
This is just our Steph.
Steph's been listening the whole way, sitting right there. Steph, give us a rating of Caveman Brett.
Maybe 100.
Oh, that's all we want to hear. So for all of our listeners, go to our Facebook page at allthews.facebook.com/up-for-a-chat. You can post your comments and your questions about today's podcast right there. You can also go to allthews.thewellnessguys.com.
Wellness Couch.
The Wellness Couch, I'm off. It was his spunky bum that got me, wasn't it? allthews.thewellnesscouch.com/up-for-a-chat. Now, don't forget, guys, you need to start to give us a little bit of an insight as to whether you want to join us when we go on our trip to Africa. Now, we have got a website, which is allthews.awakenthechangewithin.com. So if you go to that website, allthews.awakenthechangewithin.com, you'll find all of the information right there on how you can join us on our trip to Africa in 2018. We also have a trip to New Zealand in 2017 at the end of the year. But I actually do think that we've almost sold out of that trip. So if you're thinking about it, don't delay. Now's the time to get yourself booked in and get onto a payment plan that becomes easy for you to join us on our trekking holidays. So join us here next week on
We could do with a chiropractor and a photographer, actually.
Yeah, we'll come. For sure.
Subtle hint, not so subtle. Join us here next week on Up for a Chat and become part of the ripple effect that's changing the world. We'll see you on the ride, everybody.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.